I love this time of the year. I really do, because for teams that are not in the playoffs, especially for teams in Canadian markets like the Vancouver Canucks, you have so many rumors. And I open up every video about the Canucks talking about how there are so many rumors, but there really are so many rumors around here. JT Miller, you have the Capitals, you have the Avalanche, you have the Henrik Sedin stuff that we haven't talked about yet. I can make a video about the Michael Bublé comments about the room. There are just so many topics with Vancouver, but I wanted to return to the idea of trades. No, we're not revisiting Tanner Pearson. No, we're not revisiting Jason Dickinson. We're not going to talk about the Miller-Besser thing just yet, but I wanted to instead focus on the Conor Garland sweepstakes, because this is indeed a player that has been, oddly enough, in these trade discussions, at least according to everything we have seen in the media. Now, for a lot of Canucks fans, I could totally understand why Conor Garland is a lot more of this guy that they don't want to see go. They like him a lot more than they like Miller or Besser, not because he is a better player per se, or he puts up more points per se, but because he is just such a feisty little player that really has a different level of dynamism that some of these other players on the Canucks don't have, or are even close to having in that respect. He also is signed to a pretty reasonable cap hit at just under $5 million a year till 2026, when the guy is going to be, 30? Not to mention the fact that he put up 50 points this year, which is definitely not bad. So it makes things all the more interesting when you acknowledge that Conor Garland himself felt like he didn't have the best season in Vancouver in 21-22, and so it gets you licking your fingertips saying, what else is this guy capable of? 20 goals? I mean, he had 19 this recent season. Could he get 20 in a full 82 next year? But about 25? Maybe does he put up 60 points? Who really knows? This is a good enough player that even if he doesn't put up those numbers, you still know you're getting a lot out of Garland and those $5 million every single year, right? But because the Vancouver Canucks are taken over by new management, they have been talking about other players potentially on the block, and Garland is indeed one of those names. Let's go on to this article on thefourthperiod.com. This is David Pagnotta's website, NHL Insider and SiriusXM NHL contributor on the radio. This article was published on June 20th, 2022. The Canucks are looking to move multiple pieces. The article essentially opens up with Andrei Kuzmenko. It talks about how the Canucks still have a lot of other players that they might go out there and think about when trading away. During a guest appearance on the Hot Stove on SiriusXM NHL Network Radio this weekend, the fourth period's Irfan Gaffar discussed some of Vancouver's potential offseason changes, starting with JT Miller. Now, I'm not going to go over this. We know JT Miller has been on the block for a while, and we're just going to let that slide until we see something else happen. Beyond Miller, though, Irfan Gaffar noted the Canucks are going to look to move forwards Tanner Pearson, Conor Garland, and Jason Dickinson this summer, and see if OEL will consider waiving his no-movement clause. Garland was the topic of multiple trade discussions the Canucks had with other teams, and clubs like the New Jersey Devils, LA Kings, and Toronto Maple Leafs could circle back this summer. Now, one of these teams we've already discussed in the Conor Garland sweepstakes. The New Jersey Devils have entered this conversation in more ways than one. And now, with the second overall pick potentially being something that they're interested in moving, it makes the entire conversation even more delicate when you discuss names like Garland or Miller or other guys potentially being forwards that they're interested in. The Devils have been looking for some extra forward help, and you talk about guys like Kevin Fiala, them moving that second overall pick for Fiala or JT Miller instead. Those have been conversations we've discussed in this channel a lot, so you can just kind of search up any of those videos. There's a Devils playlist on my channel, so you can go ahead and check that out to see all the rumors and everything that has popped up there. But for me, when it comes to Conor Garland in New Jersey, I don't necessarily think he's the type of guy they'd be looking for the most. Because when you talk about New Jersey and where they can go with their second overall pick should they decide to use it, I've been seeing a lot of Devils fans saying in my comment section, hey, we'd rather take Juraj Slafkovsky than Logan Cooley. Even though Logan Cooley, who is a small-ish center who is very skilled and very nifty on his feet for the NTDP, is projected second by a lot of people. They'd rather take Slafkovsky because he provides an element to this team that they don't already have. They have smaller, finesse forwards like Jack Hughes. They have Nico Hischier, who is not a big guy by the slightest, but he is still finesse to the point where you could say he is, and he's a good two-way force. You have Alexander Holtz, who is a slick, small goal scorer, and Juraj Slafkovsky is a guy that has an element that none of these guys have. Huge, irreplaceable size. Conor Garland is a lot smaller than the average NHL player. He's only 5'10 and 165 pounds. But he plays a lot bigger than that. He plays like an absolute pest out there on the ice. Sure, while Conor Garland is valuable, I just don't necessarily see him as the best type of target that New Jersey would go out there for, especially when his numbers are not as good as JT Miller's were, or as Kevin Fiala's as well. You go over to the LA Kings and you take a look at what they could potentially offer in this type of move. Hey, they've got a lot of right-handed defenseman prospects and a lot of young right-handed D that I think the Vancouver Canucks could very much benefit from, but it really depends as to whether or not they'd want to go out there and move any of those names for a Conor Garland-like player. They also do have a pretty good prospect core that is slowly but surely transitioning to becoming pro talent in the AHL as well as the NHL, and so there is an argument to be made that the LA Kings don't necessarily need any more forward help. You could say they could use scoring, but Conor Garland only had 19 goals this previous season. The point is there are other players on the market that could serve towards being better acquisitions. Philip Forsberg might become a UFA. Maybe you sign that guy and you reunite him with Victor Edvinsson. Maybe you also go after Fiala, who really knows. But for Conor Garland, if the LA Kings want to go out there and add this kind of guy, it would make sense to me because they've seen so much out of him. Firstly, in Arizona, because he was there for a good chunk of his career, and in Vancouver as well. The LA Kings probably know what Garland is all about, therefore, them saying, hey, we want this guy, would not necessarily be too off the radar in my opinion. As for returns, though, we talked about with New Jersey second overall, maybe. I'm not really too sure if that is the price, though. It's pretty steep for Conor Garland by himself. I'm thinking maybe about some guys that a lot of LA Kings fans would not want me to talk about, like Jordan Spence, for example. I've been a very big fan of his game ever since he was drafted by the team. Other right-handed defensemen include Brandt, Clarke, whom I'm definitely sure the LA Kings are not going to go out there and try to trade. You also have Tobias Bjornfot on the left side, who is a pretty valuable young defenseman, too, that I think the Canucks could probably find some interest in, because Patrick Calvin, of course. Helge Grans is a right-handed defenseman that is also Swedish, so maybe he is the guy that Alvin looks at. He's a pretty big dude who definitely does have a lot more offensive potential than I thought, ever since he stepped into the Ontario Reign system this previous year. But those are just some names that I'm tossing out there for the sake of tossing out, because if Conor Garland does go to LA, there would need to be a pretty significant package coming back, considering the Canucks would be trading with division rivals. Then you go over onto Toronto, and this is a really interesting one because I don't think the Maple Leafs have been involved in any discussions about Garland, or at least ones that we as the public saw happen in front of our eyes, in the same way that they were talking about guys like Mark Giordano and, heck, even JT Miller. Like, we talked about Miller and the Leafs a few times, I'm pretty sure, but I just don't remember Conor Garland tickling that same memory. So to think that the Maple Leafs would go out there and talk about Conor Garland in a trade, firstly, I'm kind of thinking, okay, what amount of salary are the Vancouver Canucks going to be forced to retain in a type of deal like this? I mean, look, he's pretty cheap for the amount of points that he gets. 50 points for a $5 million guy who plays his heart out and he's such a pest like Conor Garland is. You could honestly debate he's kind of a bargain, but for the Maple Leafs, this is a team that has no player aside from the Big Four making over $4 million. And you have Alex Kerfoot, who made 3.5. He was the 5th highest paid forward, and then you had David Kampf. Everybody else was either on a smaller deal or salary retained or is now an RFA, so this is a team that is so cap-strapped that whatever return the Vancouver Canucks are going to have to get back, you're going to get some money for sure. Like, Kerfoot is the guy that gets memed around all the time coming to Vancouver because he's from here, but I don't know, it just doesn't really feel like something that I'd be too comfortable with, especially when you consider the Canucks retaining salary on a contract that goes on till 2026. I mean, if the Toronto Maple Leafs went out there and they said, okay, here's Topi Niemela, who is a right-handed defenseman who scores a heck of a lot of points in Finland. Here's Ronnie Hirvonen. Here's Dmitriev Chinnikov, who's probably a really underrated player. Here's Nick Robertson, for example. They have a lot of young pieces that I could definitely see making me interested in a Conor Garland trade. It's just the salary is really the biggest obstacle here, that I do feel like there's going to need to be some 3D chess maneuvering going on from Toronto's POV to make it work in a way that doesn't really screw over Vancouver by making them retain salary. So, you can let me know your thoughts in the comment section below about the Devils, the LA Kings, as well as the Leafs as to whether or not these three teams could, would, or should trade for Conor Garland from the Vancouver Canucks. If you're a Canucks fan, what do you want from any of these teams should they be the destination? Should the actual trade go down, what do you want the Canucks to receive in return? If you're a fan of any of these other teams, do you even want a guy like Conor Garland heading over to your squad? And if so, what's the max you would be willing to give up in a trade-like scenario? Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. I hope you enjoyed this video. Trolls 99, and bye.